All right, welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Carew,
And my name is Udu Abalu.
and we serve as co-chairs for the Global Citizenship Symposium. And we would like to thank the Memorial Union and Committee on Lectures funded by the GSB for sponsoring this event. We would like to introduce our guest tonight. His name is Chris Morrison, and he's traveled from, where'd you leave from today? You said?
Rhode Island today.
Rhode Island today. He's been all over. And just a little bit about him. After finishing college, Chris Morrison worked with a variety of humanitarian aid projects. These projects included health projects, supplying emergency food and medicine, educational projects, and starting schools and daycares.
In 1998, Chris founded Care Highway in the memory of his brother Sean, who was a humanitarian worker in Albania. Care Highway aims to help in areas of the world where people are suffering and are in great need due to the catastrophes caused by man and by nature. They are working face-to-face with those who are in need. Each year, Chris Morrison spends about 2 weeks in the United States talking to groups of people. His passion for his work is inspiring and contagious. It is our pleasure to introduce the founder of Care Highway, Chris Morrison.
Well, you know my name. It's Chris Morrison. Don't let the accent fool you. I'm about as Irish as Mick. My parents are Irish from the south, and I was born in the UK, and when I was a child, I went to Ireland, and then when school came along, my parents thought they'd send me to England to give me some kind of polish, but they kind of wasted their money. You'll probably find that out. Well, what is Care Highway? How long have I been doing this work? Well, last count, about 17 years. Yeah, I'm that old. You know, somebody was like, "Really?" Yeah, I'm that old. I've worked about 4 continents around the world. I started off working with a lot of big organizations, and to be honest, it was I found that I thought, sillily enough, that I could do something a bit better. But I felt that there was a lot of decisions that was made very slowly because you have such a large machine. So I thought with a smaller organization, perhaps we'll move faster. Well, it works. Decisions are made fairly quickly with Care Highway International. But how did it really start? Well, they've told you a little bit about myself, that I've been working in this, how I got started, about my brother. You know, it gives a bit of an understanding. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me, and thanks for setting everything up. If I go back to really where it started, I'll probably look at my parents. They were working in the 60s in work in the peace movement to do with Northern Ireland. And they were really against the war that took place. And I'm sure you're familiar with the north and the south of Ireland and the process, the split that took place. It was awful. Living in England at that time, for a couple of years, life was pretty unbearable because my parents were pretty high profile in the Irish community and in politics. So it drew a lot of attention. And we were hated, you know, just for a short time, but we were hated. If you ask a lot of other people, they'll say, "Oh, this scarred me forever." If you ask me, I think it was an opportunity to get to know my brothers and sisters and get to know myself and to have a small understanding of what is happening around the world with discrimination and all sorts of process. So it was a natural process to eventually start my own organization, Care Highway International. About 17 years ago, I was at college, and to be honest, not a care in the world. You know how it's like at college. You think about, okay, got to finish that paper, got to do this, got to do that. It's got its tough days too, right? Yeah? And, you know, I looked at the world outside like, well, where am I going to vacation? One day, I discovered that there was a war going on in Eastern Europe called the Yugoslavian wars, the Balkan wars. And I had the opportunity on a spring break to go take a look at what was going on. And it was a huge thing that took place because I decided to take 10 days to drive people back, to repatriate families back to their houses in Bosnia. And of course the war was going on, there was bombs going off. No one told me that there would be firing guns and bombs going off and all sorts of things. They left that part out. So, you know, I always say, being Irish, when I got back and I saw the differences and the hardship in getting there, I thought I'd go back again. The city of Sarajevo was under siege, basically. It was surrounded on all four sides in the mountains. And the only way of getting in was through a series of tunnels underneath the airport. And that had huge craters from the bombings from the Serbs. You know, even years later, I don't take any side. You know, I don't say, oh, the Serbians were right or the Bosnians were right. There was a war, because part of our job, being a humanitarian worker, an aid worker, is not to take a side. You take the side of the injured, the poor, the suffering, the person who is the, if you like, the underdog, and you help them. And I have no interest, even today, what is their background, which country they come from, you know, nothing at all. With the work, you take the person that's in front of you. Well, after going back to college, I went and spoke to a lecturer and a number of professors, and I asked them, look, I've got to go back. There's a lot of work to be done. You know, I can't do this. Trust me, I'm not suggesting anyone do that. But nevertheless, that's what I did. And they were great. I actually finished my degree, my first degree, with a fax machine in the middle of Sarajevo during the war. Let's just say my papers didn't always arrive on time. But they let me away with that. The suffering that I saw, the destruction of the war was immense. And even during working for other organizations, I always had my projects going with street kids, with trying to get them together, distributing food and medicine. Perhaps a year into it, I was distributing food and medicine up in the mountains around Sarajevo. And I was set upon by a group of Serbs, soldiers who really, the war was supposed to be over, so I have no idea what they were doing there. And they beat me pretty much until they thought I was dead. And they took all my clothes. Got a little cold because it was snowing on the ground. And they left me for dead. And when I think about it today, ladies and gents, I often imagine, you know, I should be dead. But someone found me, and I was taken to a makeshift hospital filled with children. And I was unconscious for about 2 days. When I woke up, I think the first thing that I wanted to do was throw up, because the stench was so bad. And it was no one's fault. The place was filled with beds that were almost touching each other. I could literally see the face of the person next to me right there. And it just happened to be a child. There were rats running around the floor. I was lying in my own filth. There was no one really to help me there, no doctors. There was a couple of auxiliary nurses that really didn't know what to do except try and keep me as clean as possible and keep me warm. But they didn't have water. What do if you only have enough water to drink? Do you wash yourself with it, or do you drink it? Me, I drink it. Well, when I woke up in the first dawn, I looked down, ladies and gents, at myself, and I was a mess. And I realized that I wouldn't be moving for a while. To be honest, I lay there looking up at the ceiling, and I didn't even know if it was day or night. But I thought, I'm done. I've given a year or so of my life to this. I've done my best. You know, this is not my war. This is not my problem. This is nothing to do with me. You know, because I was afraid. Right in that very point, I was really afraid. Well, something happened. First of all, having been able to see the person that was beside me on my right side, I found there was a little boy who was probably about 7. I'll never forget his face, because when I think of compassion, that was the face that I could imagine seeing, because there he was with a smile of absolute compassion, reached out, touched my face that probably looked like a piece of meat, and there he was. And as I looked down at the covers of the bed, he'd lost a limb. And then everything sort of flooded into me, you know, this whole thing. I thought, look at this kid. He's really amazing. He's embarrassing me, you know, in a good way. He's making me realize that what I have is nothing. The experience I've been through is really nothing compared to what his suffering is in that very second. But he saw in the suffering that I had in that moment, it was more than his. And he reached out. You know, he wouldn't play soccer again. These are all my thoughts. He wouldn't play for Liverpool. You know. But there he was reaching out. You know, he forgot about himself. And at the bottom of the bed was someone sleeping at the end of my bed. And it was my younger brother who had made his way basically across a terrible stretch of land where all sorts of marauding soldiers and problems were happening, because he knew I was in trouble. He'd found out, I don't know how. There he was sleeping, snoring a place down, you know. So there, I wasn't alone. You know, when I was lying there, I was in this filth. I could smell the despair in the air. All these children, it was the saddest thing of all, they didn't make any noise. And let's face it, kids make a lot of noise. They just can't help it. Thank goodness in some respects. And there they were, without noise, communicating. They were starving. Their spirit was gone. You know, I mean, we can do without food for a day, but I don't think that we can do without what makes us run, whatever our motivation is, whatever it is, within ourselves, you know? And there they were, doing without it. So I thought, right, I can't move. I'm not going to be able to walk for a while, but I can think. And so I started to think, what do they need? They need a doctor, they need food, they need medicine. They need toys, they need books, they need water. And so I woke my brother up, and I sent him down into Sarajevo, and I said, look, all the people at that time thought I was dead. Trust me, if you didn't come back after 24 hours, they were making funeral arrangements. You know, they had a really nice funeral arranged for me, actually. It was nice. But I laugh a lot about it today, but it's funny because I can say that today, that here I am to tell the tale. So, to be honest, for the next week or so, I was quite sick, and you know, I was drifting in and out of consciousness, and they really didn't know if I was going to make it. They didn't move me because I had some head injuries. And every time I woke up out of this daze, something was different. The kids had clean sheets. A doctor came in on Wednesdays. The walls were painted. The stench was gone. There was water. There was food. And just because I asked, I just took the effort to say, hey, can someone help these guys? And as I drifted in and out of consciousness, every day the kids got noisier. And in the end, one night I lay there, it must have been 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were making so much noise I couldn't sleep. Which means I couldn't slip back into a coma. In helping them, ladies and gentlemen, they helped me without even knowing it. Without knowing it, either side helped each other with that amount of effort. Because remember, I was laying in a bed. I just asked, I just spoke. And I think that was the real beginning of Care Highway International, because I thought for the most part that it was something that we could do, that anyone could do, to be involved. I realized how difficult it was to get involved with some organizations, and I realized that when I started something that I wouldn't make it difficult. I'd just be looking for kinds of people that had compassion with common sense, and that's the motto. It means a kind of a balance between what you're thinking and your heart, because too much of any of it is going to be absolutely useless to you, because you have to make decisions. The people that work in the field today, we work in Kenya in Africa, we work in Panama, Mexico, Eastern Europe, Serbia. We're still there. I'm still in Serbia. We have a computer school and I guess a daycare, because they still need our help. I remember when the war started in the Gulf, they said, when will you be leaving? And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, 200 NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are leaving in the next week because all the funding is coming from what's happening in the Gulf. And I said, wait a minute. So everything's changed for you in the last day. You don't need education anymore. You don't need help. You don't need food. And they said, oh no, we still need it. I said, so we're going to be here until we finished, because we don't run after a war. These things tend to find you. We assist any way we can, but for the most part, it's a process of staying, and it's the most shall we say, glamorous job you could possibly imagine. You hear about, wow, Africa. I just came back from Africa. I was working on the border of the Sudan, and we treated, this time, I had a team of 24 doctors, nurses, and logistics people, close to 10,000, around 10,000 people in 2 weeks. Is that a lot? You're stunned, aren't you? It's quite a lot. We did a deworming program because that's what they needed. We did a multivitamin for a lot of the kids. We did direct treatment. And I think for the most part, it was just finding the communication with the community so important. Today, we have solid projects we're building. We just finished building a small school and a clinic in the middle of Kibera. Anyone heard of Kibera in Kenya? You might have seen a lot on the news in the last week. In the last 6 months ago, there was a lot of riots that took place. Anyone? Anyway, our clinic and school is in the middle of all of that. And I'm an optimist. I just can't help it. With this sort of work, it's just how it is. And with all the destruction, they were burning schools and churches and clinics and government housing and whatever. And it was just that they were angry about the election because they didn't get a deal. And the truth is they were, their anger was founded, but perhaps not their actions. And the day came when they looked at our little school and our clinic, and they started to come around. The community stood in front of that school. They folded their arms and they said, you can burn anything else, but you can't burn this, because this belongs to us. And they remembered the fact that in all the years that we've worked, we've never asked for anything from those people except honesty. That's the organization Care Highway. It's got its imperfections. I think part of it is that there's so much work to do that we've become a victim of our own success. I often speak in many universities. Up to probably last year, I lectured probably twice at Harvard and Tufts, and many of the schools in the Midwest, in the southern states, Florida State, California, UCSD, California. Then a lot of Rotary clubs and various other places to, because we work with everybody. We're not a political or religious organization, but we work with any church that's honest enough to work with us. And you think, honest? What do you mean? Well, in the third world, it's not the same as being in America. It's not the same because sometimes it's a business. And the truth is, a year and a half ago, I was outside of a church with a bishop, not a priest, but a bishop, arguing about the fact that our doctors and nurses were inside treating the children, and they wanted to be paid to use the church, which is something we didn't do. This is something, and you think, well, it's survival. You can understand it. I don't agree with it. And of course they didn't get a penny, because that's not what we do. We offer services, we don't give money. And that's one of the fights. Why did I mention that? Because if you're interested in this kind of work and being involved, you better be ready to fight everybody. You better be ready to take on everybody, because what it means is that, imagine that you guys are the impoverished people. Right in front of them, you have all these governments and all sorts of people that will, basically, they're in the way. Because if really they were doing their job for the most part, there'd be less of those people standing behind them, and perhaps more of them standing in front of them. And you've got to learn to get through those people. And eventually, when you do, it's an amazing thing, because you have direct contact with the people. And for the most part, honest, decent. They want a chance, they want to work, they want their children to be healthy, they want to understand schools. So Care Highway looked at all these issues, and they focused on health and education, because we thought this is the way that we can lift these people from the circumstances and situation of where they are. This is the possibility for these people to lift them up from where they are and give them a better life. Inform them about their life, give them education, maths, English, Swahili, whatever that they need to learn. Teach them. And don't charge them. Give them an example. There's a possibility that if they work for the things that they want, that there are bonuses. That if they, sometimes when they cannot afford to do something, there's a possibility that someone will help them, in the hope that when they're in a position of helping someone else, they'll do the same. And I'm telling you, it works. Because now, for example, the students that we had at the school that went through the school, they came back. And now one of them is going to be a teacher. It's a win-win situation. Just behind me, I've got a PowerPoint that I want to show you. I've got this thing they call a clicker. So if it goes wrong, just say it's my first day using it. Part of the plan of Care Highway is that we set up a fund to work with catastrophes around the world, because it's a quick response. Sometimes we see a lot of time is wasted by making a decision around the table, and what the operatives, the people that are working in those areas, the directors, they actually have the power to just say, okay, I'm making an educated process here and I'm going to get something done. We do food. We give food to a lot of the people, because we work with the tribal people. You've seen National Geographical, yeah? This is who we work with, direct. Why? Because there's the real need. They haven't figured out a way of earning a living. They scratch around here and there. I mean, they trade goats. They do various other things, literally. Many of the people that you see there, they've never seen a television. They don't have radio. They don't have shoes and whatever. And you could say sometimes they're more happier than many of us. But unfortunately, they're also sick, because there's no doctors there that takes the time to bother. A little bit too much about me, I think. Let's move on. I've been speaking around the States now. This is my 8th year. I remember the first year. It doesn't get any easier. More and more states, bless you, more and more states are... I remember one year I spoke in 12 states in a space of about 3 weeks. It's a Serbian project. After the war, there wasn't, you can probably see some of the buildings were bombed in Serbia. I lived in the middle of Sarajevo during the war, and I remember, be careful what you wish for. I remember one morning I was, every morning when I went down to the cafe below to get a cappuccino or a coffee or something, I used to say, wouldn't it be great if there was a stairs that just took me right down through my bedroom and whatever. Well, let me tell you, one morning I came back from work. I was working in the mountains, and there was a bomb had gone through my front window and gone through the floor. So that morning I looked through the hole and said, cappuccino. So you can see that a lot of the destruction. These children are, I guess you'd call them gypsies or travelers, Roma kids, and basically they were moved from place to place from a place called Kosovo. You ever heard of the war in Kosovo? Took place. It was the bloodiest out of all 4 wars there, I think, in my experience. And so they were moved and moved until they ended up on a city dump. And so what we do is we distribute wood for the winter, and we give food, medicine, and we get doctors around there. They're regular kids, great fun. I remember standing there once and my hand was hanging down, and this little kid just came and put his hand in my hand. And I looked down, he just looked up with absolutely no teeth. Very cute. So these you see this piles of things behind? That's their houses. That's where they live. Imagine that. We found 2 cases of tuberculosis, and so we brought doctors and vaccines and things to help with that. This is the computer access. One of the students, actually, it's kind of a nice story. One of the students that took place came from a very poor family. His father was killed during the war. Many of the kids that go there, they're part of, they've lost their parents, most of them. He was in the top 50 students in the country. And the reason that he got to that stage is that he had the opportunity to go into our project and work on the computer. He did his work, and we had a tutor that worked there with him. In the national newspapers, he said, we need more of this. So hopefully the government listen. So we're back to the city dump. And the terrible thing is, when we got down there, we went with another organization. And basically, they felt that it was so tough that they couldn't stay to watch. So when they started to cry, which it was very tough, I said, look, go wait in the car, and we'll see you in a while. And they were angry because they said, when I saw them later, they said, how come you didn't feel something for these kids walking in the snow without shoes on, or that they didn't have jackets, or they didn't have these things? And I said, I'm sorry, I was too busy. I was too busy finding out what size their shoes is, what size the jacket they need, where am I going to get the food, and how on earth I'm going to get them out of here. Well, this group, we managed to move them. We worked with the UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and we got them tents. And the piece of land that's just up above, the community gave it to them. But it's still a struggle. There's still, part of the community want to give it to them, part of it doesn't. Anyway, they've since moved out of there. And in front, that's the city dump. Cute kid. Great sense of humor. I like that. That's really cool. I also like an idea. An old farmer in Ireland told me once, he said, why have an opinion if you don't do anything about it? It's an interesting statement, isn't it? Panama, basically we're working to, it's mostly a process of getting kids to school. Last year, I believe, we had a group of nurses going down to Panama, and actually 2 of them are here. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Jean. Yeah, so they did very well. They treated a lot of patients down there, but they volunteered and they went down there. This is Mexico right here, and we put a filtration system into the water because the kids were getting sick. There's a couple of children's homes down there that we're supporting. And just on the left-hand side, if you're wondering what that construction is, the Mexican government had an idea, or should I say, a funding to basically put in electrical lines. But it was a kind of a catch-22 because it cost about $200 to put in your own meter. So we worked it out with the local community that somehow we set it up so we found a loan system and they paid it back. So there we are digging. This is Panama. These are orphans. I don't really like that word. I always think children without parents. It sounds a lot better, but nevertheless, it's an orphanage. And we support it. It's a lady who basically rolls up her sleeves and gets on with the job. And she loves those kids. She'll do anything for them. There's about 109. So we go down there. We work with a lot of students from Florida State, from some of the other universities, Texas, U of A, I think they call it, University of Austin, Texas, or University of Texas, Austin. And they go down. We also work with the Rotary Club down there as well, and we basically support them. Something I forget to say, and it's kind of interesting, is although I'm the founder and director of Care Highway, I don't take a salary. I actually don't take any kind of a salary. It's a bit of a running joke in the organization now. There's quite a few hundred people doing work everywhere, and it's a bit of a joke that I always say, next year I'll take a salary. And it's been 10 years, so I'm not sure. I earn money, actually. I spend about 5 months of the year working as a tour guide. Completely nothing that I study whatsoever, but it gives me the flexibility to work and earn my daily bread, so to speak, and then have enough money. I think that for me, I feel like it's a normal thing. We have people that are paid in the organization, but part of what I do, I think, I'd rather other people get paid to do it. I probably like it too much. One day, I'll probably have to do it when we're a victim, even more of a victim of our own success, when things get bigger and that we can't cope just with volunteers. This is Kibera, and we have every year we usually spend, I usually spend about 6 weeks inside the Kibera. Can you see those roofs? It's 1.2 million people living without a bathroom, sanitation, without any form of, really, it's absolutely disastrous. They have electricity going in there, but they can't afford it. And mostly, these guys, they run the city. They basically do all the menial work. They work in the houses, they work in the gas stations, that sort of thing. But at night, after 10 o'clock, no one goes out because it's completely dangerous. It's really bad. I work there. We have a clinic there and we see patients. We also have a school with just over 20 children. We're putting it up to 25 now. And they're between 4 and 6. This is part of the medical team that work inside the clinic. These guys are from Spain. We normally have a multinational group that come. The last team was 24. The team before that was 34, including local staff. It was over 50 people working with the projects. And what do we find? Well, we find this is Mukuru, which is in Nairobi, another terrible area. We find TB, HIV, we find cholera. We find everything that you could possibly imagine, the lowest of the low sort of stuff that has disappeared. I've even, in some of the isolated villages, I've even found leprosy. I saw it the last time I was up there, which is something almost unheard of, close to the Uganda border. My job, for the most part, is logistics. I keep basically things running, and I work with a staff of logistics. Often we have people that go that aren't medically trained or aren't teachers, no doctors, etc., and they basically help to run things. And often it's the case that we have, every once in a while, we have students from the States that are coming. But it works. This is us setting up underneath the trees in one of the tribal areas. And give you an idea how bad the road is. It took us 2 hours to get 17 miles. 2 hours. Part of the road we had to actually build. We're starting an international campaign for deworming. And what happens is that what little food that the kids eat, they have these tapeworms, various types of worms, in their stomach, and it just eats all the food, and the kids just don't get any of the benefit. So the idea is to set up a study that proves that if 4 times a year the kids are given the deworming medicine, which costs about 15 cents a child. Joke, isn't it? That's all it takes. So we have a program. The last time we dewormed about 5,000 children. So it's really something. It's 5 milligrams, one, next one, next one. It's something. But anyway, we want to prove that. And if that's the case, then what they'll do is governments will be talking with the UN and see if we can make kind of a difference. This is a little school. It's blue. It's a big joke in Care Highway that that's my favorite color, blue. And that's the only advantage of being the founder and director. I get to choose blue. Just in there you can see also there's a little clinic on the end and the pharmacy. These are some of the kids that are in our school, and most of them are, orphans. They live with their grandparents. In Kenya, a whole generation's lost through HIV and AIDS, and usually what happens is that if they haven't run off, basically the kids are left with the grandparents who are old and unable to deal with a 4-year-old, but they do their best, because there is a great sense of duty. They look very serious. They're very sweet kids. So usually they come to school, they get fed in the morning, and then they get lunch. And usually the parents or the local community, they cook. We provide the food, but they cook it. Because the land that it's based on, although we paid for the building, the land was given free. Everywhere we build, there's got to be a partnership with the community. It cannot be that we go in and say, look, we're the benevolent people, just take this. Because what you do is you build up a dependency, and that's wrong, because in the end, people despise you. You've got to make it that it belongs to them. You've got to allow them to have ideas. And in the end, it works. You survive. Yeah, it is true. It started off, the idea of this organization was myself. I was in Sweden writing a paper for the university, and I sat up in bed one morning and I was bored writing papers, and I thought I was used to already being in the field. This was after the Bosnian Wars, and I thought it's time to do something. So I came up with an idea to send care packages to Bosnia, and that was the beginning of the story, really. that's that. Do you have any questions? I'm so happy I'm done with that clicker thing. Any questions?
Where do you get all your
Funding, how about that? We were joking about that. It's something I often leave out. It always puts in a question there. Well, actually, up to recently, Rotary clubs, individuals, a lot of schools, high schools, middle schools, companies, and to be honest, the people that raise most is high schools, middle schools, colleges. They do various fundraising things, and we tend to. We're also being given some grants by a manufacturing company in Spain to build. We've just recently built a children's home to house 36 children, and the entire funding for that in the next 2 years will come from a clothing company, and which we're kind of happy about. This building, bought and paid for. The idea is that you don't owe anything. That means that when you move on to the next project, you're not in debt. The trick is, because what we're doing here, ladies and gentlemen, is a responsibility. Because once we start helping those individuals to help themselves, we become responsible. I mean, I'm not telling you anything today that you don't know, because it's just the obvious, the common sense thing. But that tends to be where we'll get the funding. Anybody else?
Have you ever gone back and checked like any of the housing and what projects you have done in the past, like to see where they've progressed?
Oh yeah, all the time. In fact, I was just there very recently, I think a little over a month ago in Kenya, and I'm constantly there. I mean, I think that's the thing that I really like very much about Care Highway, is that it's hands-on. There's no person up in an ivory tower that's kind of handing out details and saying, okay, you do whatever. We're all on the ground. It's face-to-face work. And that's what I really love about it, because it means that I'm never going to lose touch with what it is that needs to be done. And the plan is the organization's getting bigger. Probably in 10 years from now, it'll be a household name. You know, you'll hear about it and say, oh, that guy. Or maybe you forget, perhaps. But nevertheless, it'll be that process where it'll be whoever's running the whole deal. They're going to, 2 weeks of the year, they'll go and work a menial work. Anything that will help. They'll be cleaning wounds, they'll be painting buildings, they'll be sweeping the floor. You know, it's funny, I joke about my life. In a single day, I was sitting down in the State House talking to the Prime Minister. And then I took off my suit, made my way across town, and I started painting and sweeping up in Kibera. I mean, that's the kind of life that's Care Highway right there, where it's a hands-on thing, where, yeah, we can speak to the President, we can talk to the Prime Minister, we communicate, but the real hands-on, down-to-earth stuff, we're not going to lose that contact. And part of the deal will always be whoever's running the organization, they are always going to have a touch of why it's so important that we save money.
Chris, would you speak to the idea, I know people who have volunteered, but do you have other, would you just talk about
the other things? Well, what tends to happen is if we've got other people that are interested that aren't doctors or teachers, they often go on a process of doing what we call logistic work, which means if they're interested in education, they'll probably go along and support a teacher. If they're interested in just understanding what it is that's going out there, often the case will be that they'll come out and they'll work with me. They'll probably, we'll make sure that the doctors have enough supplies. You'll end up setting up the clinics for the day, the mobile clinics, any amount of things. And eventually, our process is kind of do things in the States or do things in the UK or wherever you come from. And we promote, today you haven't heard me once say, we are the answer, or that you should help us. No, because when I go around the country, what I say to people is, you got to start locally. You got to look around and just see what's needed here, because you get the great experience. I said that I was in New York at quite a well-known university, and the chancellor of the university said, "Chris, that was really good." Actually, he called me Mr. Morrison, which was a big mistake. And he said, "That's great, but having told the students to help locally, you don't have a project locally. How does that help Care Highway?" And he didn't get it. The point that I'm here is not just to say, "Hey, look, come along, help us," with the aspects of whatever skills that you have, be involved. But it's about help. It's about saying, look in your own community. Because what we usually do now is people work and do things for Care Highway or for other organizations in the community. Sometimes it's through Care Highway, because we really promote doing things for the community here. And I always say to the high school students, you might see a man on 4th Street that has no shoes, and you feel this feeling, you know what, I'm going to go out and help that guy. I'm going to go and do something. I'll get him some shoes. Tomorrow, if he's not wearing that shoes, I always say, you are not the fool. He is, because that was his decision. You gave him an opportunity. And what did you spend? Maybe you stole your brother's pair of shoes, you went to the Goodwill, whatever, and you brought it down and you gave it to them. That was an effort. You gave him an opportunity, or her, an opportunity to do something, to be more comfortable. Well, how much effort does that take? I can tell you nothing. As much effort as it takes to probably go and get a bagel from some place. Are you with me? So this is the kind of thing. So a lot of things can be done. A lot of it's about supporting professionals in the third world. And there's a lot of space for that. As the years go on, there'll be more and more. Any more questions? You quiet bunch. It's so nice, actually. After coming out from Rhode Island, they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, let me ask you a question. Let's put it back to you. What I've told you today, was there anything that struck you as interesting or something that you agreed or disagreed with, or something that gave you an emotional response? Anything? What's your feeling about what I've said today?
Well, because I like the idea that when you go in, you think of the community, part of that, when you leave, that space is there. Because I work with kids too, if they don't own it, it's not going to be something more than their experience. So they have to buy into it, they have to really understand it, and it's part of the solution.
And it works every single time. But it's not about us coming in and saying, it's a bit like walking down the street and giving somebody $1. I mean, you'll probably shoot me for saying this, but that hasn't solved a darn thing. I mean, it might make you feel better. Let's be honest. Yes or no? You see something and you think, okay, there's $1. What's going to happen with that $1? Who cares what they spend it on? That's not the point. It's not a moral high ground or anything, but the point is, what's going to happen to that person? Did the $1 really help? I don't know. Maybe he'll go out and buy a hot dog and he'll eat something. Okay, that's the positive side of me. That's this eternal optimist. But the other side is, what's happened? The question is there a place where this guy can go? Sometimes when you see the things that happen in the world, it's about saying, do I take responsibility for this? Or, I was discussing it early, there's two kinds of problems. One that belongs to you, and one that belongs to someone else and you're going to help them with. And there's a real difference. That's the compassion with common sense. Are you with me on that?
Yeah, but maybe that $1, taking your brother's shoes and giving him your brother's shoes, maybe they weren't the right size anyway, but if you gave him $1, maybe it goes down to Goodwill and gets a pair of shoes fit.
You might be right.
So that $1, I think first you should feel good about the $1 of what they're doing with it, but then let that $1 kind of prime the pump whoa, I did this, it feels good, but what more can I do? And
Yeah.
that's, I think, what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, and I think part of it is really just finding. And the thing is, it's down to you. What it is that you decide, and you say, okay, that the point of this is what, that how far do you go to assist people in need? That's the point. So for Care Highway, we travel 6,000 miles or 8,000 miles or whatever it is, and we assist those people in the field. We also do things in Spain. We also do things in the City of London because there's needs there. And part of what we're promoting at the moment is getting more people involved in the work that we're doing, and in the hope that it's fulfilled. My life's pretty fulfilled. I mean, I promise you that I don't think that I'm a better person than anybody else. I don't think I'm a more pious person than anybody else. I think what I do feel is that my life is fulfilled. And it's not about saying anyone's better or worse than anybody else, because we've all got our struggles. But it's just finding out how far do you go, how in this balance of compassion with common sense, where am I? Do I feel like that I want to do something? I hope in the things that I've spoken about today, it'll give you some idea of what's happening out there, and I'm sure you're aware of it. But if you're interested in doing something that would, that's perhaps more than what you're doing now, and you're interested, then we really would like to help focus that. If it's given you an idea to help locally, that's also great. Yes.
I wanted to mention, just so you folks would know, that when we had all the floods last summer, Chris got a hold of me through other people in the States and asked what Care Highway could do, and gave money right away, immediately. That's the beautiful thing about this organization. There's not a lot of red tape. Things can happen faster than normal, and got money in the hands of people that needed bedding and clothing. They lost everything in Cedar Rapids. Just like that, just in a matter of a day. And when I first heard Chris talk, what appealed to me was, while there are a lot of great organizations, I love the idea of being part of something that was so immediate. When Cindy and I went to Panama, we literally carried with us from my little community and her community, physically carried the supplies and took them there and used them and gave them to people. So there's just that immediacy of knowing that there's no desk that we're paying for somewhere, or nobody's salary or whatever. It's just, it really has a wonderful feeling that money isn't being wasted. So I really appreciate that.
Sorry, how do we avoid the red tape? We do this really interesting thing. We sit around the table and we decide that before we get up, we'll make a decision. So if we sit down and have a meeting, part of the mandate of Care Highway is to say, okay, we need to decide on this, so let's do it. So usually if we sit down to make an educated decision on something, it's going to be that we have the facts with us. So I don't understand sometimes the big red tape for some things. But basically, we empower people that work with us to say, look, you're an intelligent person, if you have all the details, what do you need to do? If it's about spending money, they talk to me or they talk to some of the other directors at a different country. And if it's a necessity and they explain, we get an email or we get a phone call, it's like, do it. That's what happened with the flood victims. We saw that happen. And there was an immediate meeting. We'd heard about the floods that took place in the States. And we called it an emergency meeting and said, okay, we're helping out in Africa. The people in America are helping us out in Africa. They're helping us out in Panama, and now they're in trouble. What are we going to do about it? I think that decision took about 4.5 minutes. It was just about how much do we have to give. That's how you can cut the red tape. Yes? That is the mystery of the universe. I think there's a lot of aspects. I mean, I could make excuses, and I could say that they, it's about funding, where they get their money from. It's about how they spend their money. I really don't know. There's some wonderful organizations out there, like the Salvation Army. They're wicked. They are absolutely wicked people. They at 20, I think it's 99 cents in the dollar goes to the projects. I remember when I first started years ago, I was a student. I was a youth worker, so a social worker, and I worked with a lot of students, kids that were basically wayward. They just didn't know where they were going. So I took them out with the Salvation Army, and usually we started at 2 a.m. in the morning, and they would go out and give out soup and sandwiches and things. These guys were not a pious bunch at all. The golden rule was simply this: if the person that is sleeping in the street is asleep, don't wake them up. So they didn't stand there and just say, they gave them what they needed. And then when I saw that, I thought, these are remarkable people. And absolute, unsung heroes. So there's a lot of good organizations out of there. I'm just saying that the way we do things is that we look at, here's the problem, let's just look at it. Let's not take 3 weeks. Let's get all the information before we sit down, get it. Sit down, make an educated decision. These days, my question is, can we afford it? And you think, oh, well, it's money. It comes down to money. Well, actually, it's just a responsibility. Everybody that you've seen in these pictures, we've helped them. We've either given them food, they're having education, we're going to look after them probably as long as there is a possibility. We give them medicine, they go to a clinic, they go to a school, etc., etc. We do everything that we can. Everybody that you saw here from all these 3 continents that we are in contact with, we do our best to help them to help themselves. It's funny, isn't it? I was reading a speech by JFK, his inauguration speech, 1961. And he said something, it was when he first started the Peace Corps. And he said, let's go out to the huts. I remember that was kind of whatever, but in Africa, and help the people to help themselves. So I kind of like that idea. I have to say that that's something that we've worked alongside the Peace Corps and various other organizations there, and they just work great. I think here's the bottom line, ladies and gents. There's enough poverty and ignorance in the world and starvation for all the organizations out there. So I think they can all help. We can all help. Part of our mandate is that we support other organizations to do the work. So it's major. Anyway, ladies and gents, I want to thank you for coming today. It's really, I just feel heartfelt. I want to thank the ladies that put this together as well. Thanks so much for inviting us over. We really appreciate it, having a chance to talk to you. Thank you very much. And incidentally, if you're interested in anything with Care Highway, you can check out the website. You got the details there. There's information. You can also sign up for volunteers. And also, we have Jean Walker, who's actually a local representative. She lives in Madison County, Madison County, Madison County, Madison County, Madison County, Madison County, Madison. Yes. So in Winterset. So if there's some interest, we'd like to have you. Thanks for coming. Thank you.